Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought once again that I would talk about this topic of conversation and that I thought that I would kind of get into this once again more about the Canelo Alvarez and Andre SOG Ward situation. And I'm going to review a video here by that of Boxing Ego, and within this video, what I'm going to really do is really address a multitude of things. And the main themes within this video, not only am I going to break down Canelo Alvarez's resume, from my perspective, at least overall when you talk about his career, but we're also going to be talking about what the difference is between that of constructive criticism and that of a hater. And also, in my view, what the true narratives and what the true machinations are of a lot of these LDBC and new media channels. And the reason why I thought that I would talk about all this is because a lot of people, especially when it comes to that of sports talk, they don't know the difference between someone that's giving constructive criticism and someone being a hater. Now, in this most recent conversation about Andre SOG Ward, talking about that of Canelo Alvarez, there's certain things in my view that Andre Ward stated about Canelo that I would say is constructive, and certain things that I would say is constructive criticism, and there's certain things that I would say to where I'm not 100% sure whether Andre Ward is hating on Canelo or not, but it almost seems that way because there's certain things that Andre Ward states to where it's like, to me, something a little bit extra is going on there. And I know certain people might say, oh, well, Andre is just telling the truth on Canelo, and you just can't handle it. Once again, I'm not a fan of any of these fighters. I respect both of these fighters in terms of Andre Ward and Canelo because both of them, in my view, are all-time great fighters. But once again, there's a difference between constructive criticism and that of hating. And when Andre Ward says something along the lines of, well, you know what, Canelo, if you're supposed to be looked at as debatably the best fighter on the planet, then you're going to have to fight the fight that everyone wants to see against that of David Benavidez. Don't tell me that you're the best fighter on the planet. And then, you say that you don't want to fight this guy and that, oh, this guy just wants a payday. That's something that's a little bit constructive. That's something to where I can completely understand that point, and I agree because those are the standards that we hold for all of the elite top tier pound for pound fighters. Completely agree with that. Even though, of course, I wonder what Andre Ward's opinion would be about Terrence Bud Crawford potentially not fighting that at Jerome Boots Ennis. But of course, one could say that that's a bit of a different situation as well. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. But then when you start to get into certain things about, oh, well, Canelo, take a look at his resume. He always fights these guys at the perfect time. He picks and chooses them at the most convenient of times. Well, is that really the truth, or is that really something based more on narrative? Because when we really take a look at a lot of sports, people, from what I notice, a lot of fans, they really try to, implement a lot more narrative than what they really do factual information. And I see it in every single sport, whether we talk about NBA basketball, tennis, UFC, boxing, football, it really doesn't matter what it is. In tennis, when I take a look at it, what people say about Novak Djokovic, for example, one of the narratives that the Fadal fans, as they like to call them, the Roger Federer and the Rafael Nadal fans, what they'll always say to try and diminish Djokovic's achievements is that, oh, well, Novak Djokovic played in the weakest era of tennis of all time, and he finally started beating Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer when they were super old and washed up. That's not really true. Because when you take a look at it, Roger Federer was 33 years old, or around 32 to 33 years old, and still winning Grand Slams, once Djokovic really reached the peak of his powers. And Nadal is only 1 year older than that of Novak Djokovic, so that has to be a lie. So that's not really the case, when it comes down to. And then they'll say, oh, well, Novak Djokovic played in the weakest era of tennis because these guys don't really know how to win. Well, how many guys within the early era of Roger Federer really overall really knew how to win, at least as consistently as that of a Rafael Nadal or a Roger Federer? So when we take a look at, oh, Novak played in the weakest era of tennis, is that really the case? Or was the Roger Federer era a little bit more weaker? Because to be fair to Novak Djokovic, once he reached the peak of his powers, he didn't just have Roger Federer and also that of Rafael Nadal to worry about. He also had that of Stan Wawrinka, Stanimal. He also had that of Andy Murray, and he had a couple of other guys. And then, of course, later on, eventually he had to deal with Carlos Alcaraz, Yannick Sinner, Daniel Medvedev, and a certain amount of other guys. So is that really the case, or is that really something that's more narrative driven? And then of course if you go to NBA basketball, people will state overall that, oh, well, Michael Jordan in the 90s was playing plumbers. He wasn't really playing great teams. Is that really something overall that's really the truth, or is that something that's a little bit more narrative driven? Because we can take a look back at those 90s teams that Michael Jordan ended up facing, like the Seattle Supersonics, to where they had about 4 or 5 players averaging double figures. And then on top of that, you're talking about Sean Kemp. You're talking about Gary Payton being on that team, Hershey Hawkins, Dead Left Shrimp, a certain amount of other guys. When you talk about the Phoenix Suns, you're talking about Dan Marley, who was a 3-time All-Star. You're talking about Charles Barkley, who was an MVP candidate. You're talking about Kevin Johnson. You're talking about Danny Ainge being on that team and a certain amount of other guys. The point is that a lot of the times in sports, a lot of things that get spread around, they're oftentimes more than not propagandic, and a lot of the times more driven by an agenda than what they are truly facts. It is what it is. Now, certain people may say, well, how can we overall know the difference between someone that's giving constructive criticism or the facts of the matter? Because aren't you just personally stating your opinion? So why should we take your fact overall or your opinion as fact and not Andre SOG Ward's or a certain amount of other things? And let me tell you what, when it comes down to it, that's a fair enough point. But to state that Canelo Alvarez has just, overall fought guys at the perfect convenient time, well, is that something overall, once again, that's really truthful? Or is that something that's a little bit more narrative? We're going to go through that as the video goes along. But let's get straight into it. Let's see what they have to say.
You won't believe what Andre Ward had to say about Canelo. Pede. You won't pede. I know that. In a brand new interview, Andre Ward did an interview with Fight Hype. And he didn't hold back. He didn't pull any punches. He gave his truest, honest thought. Now, the thing that I liked about Dre Ward in this particular interview is he let it be known that he's not gonna be knocked off his position. Meaning the stuff he has to say for Canelo, if he wants to say it, if he's asked a question, he's gonna do his due diligence and answer it honestly and effectively. He doesn't care about the Canelo man fans. He doesn't care. No one's going to prevent him from speaking his mind as it pertains with truthful stuff in boxing. So you
Right. And, Andre SOG Ward, if he truly believes in that, then he shouldn't back down about that if that's what he believes is truly logical. But here's my question. I don't mind what Andre Ward is saying about Canelo Alvarez, at least in terms of, listen, if you're going to be looked at as the best, you can't hide behind this payday stuff overall and say that, oh, this guy just wants a payday. At the end of the day, if we're going to count you debatably as the best fighter on the planet, then, you have to fight these guys. That's something to where it's like, you know what, Andre, I completely agree with that because that's something to where we hold the same standards. But then once you start getting into something of, well, take a look at Canelo Alvarez's resume. He fights these guys at the most convenient time every single time, and, take a look at when he fought them, and this is where I get into this conversation because if we do this for Canelo Alvarez, no problem. We can do it for Canelo Alvarez. But is it really that he fought them at the worst point in times in their career, or is it that overall, once again, that he fought them pretty much at the best point, or at least at a very great point? Because if we're going to do this nitpicking game, then let's do it for everybody else. All right? Because, but we'll talk about that as the video goes along.
guys can watch the interview.
Because a lot of people, once again, they like to do this nitpicking game where they say, oh, well, he fought this guy when he already lost. Oh, he fought this guy after a year layoff. Oh, he fought this guy after an injury, blah, blah, blah. But then they don't use the same standards according to other fighters that they like to propel and push up there within the rankings. So are you keeping the same energy, or are you, once again, only doing it for this specific fighter? And it's no offense against Andre SOG Ward, but I haven't heard him talk whatsoever about Terrence Bud Crawford doing this in certain ways. Because if we're talking about really a fighter that really has fought certain fighters at the most particular time, let's talk about Terrence Bud Crawford. Because he didn't fight Yuriorkis Gamboa overall at his peak weight class. Gamboa had to move up in weight. He really was not a natural 135 pounder, and Gamboa was coming off of a year layoff. When we talk about Sean Porter had already lost 3 times in his career and wasn't even a champion when Terrence Bud Crawford had defeated him. So are we going to talk about that? Are we going to talk about Terrence Bud Crawford fighting Kell Brook after he was already knocked out 2 times viciously and was not a champion and had no chance of ever being a champion ever again? And fighting Amir Khan also when he was already knocked out 3 times in brutal fashion and never had a chance of becoming champion again? fought Errol Spence Jr. after about a 14th month layoff and after certain car accidents. My point being is this: we can make certain excuses overall about all these fights all we want to. Now, there's certain times to where, some of these will be a little bit more relevant. Like if we're talking about in Terrence Bud Crawford's case, I don't really like to make excuses that much for the Porter and the Spence fights because those guys still very clearly were at an A grade point in their career. Whatever you want to state about them. But if we're talking about Kell Brook versus Amir Khan, then yeah, that's something that has to be brought up because those guys were done. like if you knew what was going on and if you have any sense of boxing intelligence whatsoever, you could tell overall that those dudes, they were chopped liver. They were done. All right, but once again, that's another thing as well that a lot of people don't know the difference between a washed up fighter and someone that's just a little bit older or maybe not at the peak of their powers. Like when you take a look at Kell Brook and Amir Khan, those guys were washed. Those guys were done. But like a lot of people take a look at Canelo versus Sergey Kovalev and they say, "Oh, well, Sergey Kovalev was cooked. He was absolutely finished." He wasn't finished. Now, if you want to state that Sergey Kovalev was not necessarily, at the best point in his career, that's something that's logical. That's something that we can bring up because, of course, Sergey Kovalev was already knocked out a couple times by that point in time in his career. But to state that he was just completely cooked and completely washed up as a fighter, well, how can we really state that when Sergey the Crusher Kovalev was coming off of two great wins in the light heavyweight division against two top 5 to top 10 contenders within that weight class? He got knocked out by a later Alvarez and went in the rematch and completely outboxed him with all 12 rounds and won back his title. And then in the next fight against Anthony Yard, he was able to have, pretty much an ass whooping over that of Anthony Yard overall and then knock him out eventually. All right, the undefeated prospect that was looked to be very potential difficult challenge for Sergey Kovalev. So you're telling me that guy was just completely chopped liver? I'm sorry, I just can't agree with that. Now, once again, if you want to state that Sergey Kovalev maybe was not necessarily quite the same fighter, okay, that's something that we can state. But if we're going to use those standards for that of Sergey Kovalev with Canelo and other fighters, okay, no problem. Let's start doing it all across the board. So then we all of a sudden have to start saying that with Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Oscar De La Hoya because Oscar De La Hoya was not at the peak of his powers. He was not at the peak of his powers. Oscar De La Hoya had already been beaten multiple times. He was stopped by Bernard Hopkins by the time, overall, once again, that Floyd Mayweather Jr. fought him. Okay? When he fought Zab Judah had already lost by knockout. He had already lost multiple times. When he fought Miguel Cotto was knocked out brutally twice. But he also was an 8th grade level champion at 154. But because he lost a couple times in the past, okay, so then are we going to start keeping the same energy and say that Floyd didn't defeat Miguel Cotto at his best and that he fought him at the perfect time? Is that the standards that we're going to state? That's up to you if you want to use those standards. But I'm not really going to use those standards because, once again, I can usually tell when a fighter is at a great point in time in their career and when they're not. Now, if we're talking about Canelo fighting guys that maybe were not, that were washed up, then we're talking about guys like Shane Mosley or Carlos Baldomir. Those are good examples. But to say that Sergey Kovalev and, some of these other guys, no.
To hear it verbatim, but I'll paraphrase what Andre Ward was saying. He was talking about the Breakfast Club interview where he famously had some things. Canelo said that he was jealous. The reason why Andre Ward was saying something about him was because of jealousy. And I see Canelo, his fan base, his base tends to suggest that as well. Anybody saying anything, because I've even gotten it from my channel, like where I make a video criticizing something that's rightful that Canelo has done, and the only thing Canelo's fans or Canelo can come up with is, "You're jealous. You're jealous of him." And Andre Ward says and assures that's not the case. Money's not everything. He says, "You don't know my personal situation. You don't know my finances, what I have, what I don't have. So jealousy ain't it." And it shows you.
Right, but is this really about money? Boxing ego? Like who really cares about the money when it comes down to it? Is Andre Ward overall, once again, is he a dude that, once again, that he's really worried about the money if he was quote unquote jealous of that of Canelo? And who knows, maybe Andre Ward maybe is a little bit jealous of Canelo because Andre Ward, even though I'm sure he earned a great amount of money, he was never the cash cow like what Canelo Alvarez was. So is it possible? Who knows? But what I will state is this. I think that Andre Ward, once again, that this is partially him sticking up for his boy Terrence Crawford. But on top of that, he takes a look at Canelo and he states that, this dude, in my view, is not on my level. A lot of people, think that he's this great. I don't think that he is that great. So do I think that there's a little bit potential jealousy going on here? Yeah, personally I do. Because once again, to state something along the lines, once again, of Canelo, you need to fight the best of the best, no problem with that. Those are the standards that we hold for everybody. But to say something along the lines of something that can easily be disproven, to state something along the lines of, oh, well, when you take a look at how well he's been matched up, we have to give a lot of credit to his promoters because he's been perfectly matched up, because he fights guys when they're not at their best. So then that's when all of a sudden I have to say, okay, well, you know what? Let's take a look at Canelo's resume really quickly. Because Canelo fought Austin Trout when Austin Trout was coming off the win over Miguel Cotto. That's when he fought Austin Trout, and he was an undefeated fighter. He fought Araceli Lara when Lara was looked at the most dangerous in his career. And certain people, of course, are going to say, oh, well, Lara should have won that fight. They robbed him. Well, it was a fight that could have won either way. Because Lara, you could debate, certainly could have threw more in that fight. So it is what it is. At the end of the day, they gave it to Canelo. It was a fight that couldn't win either way, could have won either way, and they gave it to Canelo. So it is what it is. He fought Lara at his most potential dangerous. He fought Miguel Cotto when he was the WBC and Ring Magazine champion at the middleweight class. All right. So, and when he was looked to be a little bit more refurbished with that of Freddie Roach, and he was going, doing knockout after knockout over knockout, not stating that it was over the greatest competition, but don't sit here and tell me that Cotto was not at the time, at least a championship level fighter, because he was. He was a guy, once again, overall that was looked at to be a great fighter, and that fight was looked to be overall a 50-50 level fight. So for people to just state that, oh, Cotto was completely washed up, well, was he completely washed up against Floyd Mayweather? Because Cotto had already been stopped and beat multiple times by the time that he fought Floyd Mayweather. So, I mean, if we're going to keep the same standards, then let's keep them across the board. All right? Or if we're going to go by those standards, let's keep them across the board. And then, of course, when he later on fought that, of the middleweight guys, Gennady Golovkin. Now, people say, oh, Gennady Golovkin was 36 years old. You can't be at the best point in time in your career at 36 years old. Terrence Bud Crawford right now is 36 years old. Does anyone believe that he's not potentially, at least debatably, at the best point in time in his career, or the number one pound-for-pound fighter? Do you believe that Terrence Bud Crawford right now is not a great fighter and that he's completely washed up as a fighter because he's going to turn 36 years old this year? Do you believe that? So, do we also believe that Mayweather was washed up at 36 years old? Do we believe that Bernard Hopkins, when he defeated Felix Tito Trinidad all the way back in 2001 when he was age 36, do we believe that he was completely washed up? So once again, if we're going to keep these standards, then let's keep them across the board. But it's very clear that Gennady was not washed up. He was coming off of a victory over Danny Jacobs in a very narrow fight. And people will state, oh, well, Gennady was showing slippage because, of the tough fight with Danny Jacobs. Well, is that really slippage, or is that just the biggest middleweight fight in the world? Like, people are actually trying to accumulate slippage from Gennady Golovkin because Gennady Golovkin had a tough fight against the top contender at that time in Danny Jacobs. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. And then after that he fought Canelo. Probably should have won that fight. I thought it was a poor decision. I thought they should have gave it to Golovkin in the first fight. Then of course he fought Vanes Martirosyan, a guy who had never even been dropped, I believe, in his career, and fought the likes of Demetrius Bupo Andrade, Araceli Lara, and Jermell Charlo. Never been dropped by any of them, I believe. And Gennady Golovkin was able to knock him out in 2 rounds. 2 rounds. So that's the fight that's the fighter I'm allegedly supposed to believe is washed up. Then Canelo Alvarez fights Danny Jacobs, who had just became a champion after defeating that of the undefeated Sergey Derevyanchenko. And I also don't believe that Derevchenko, whatever his name is, I don't believe that he's an elite fighter either. And of course, Danny ended up starting losing, fights overall once again a little bit later on. But he was never the same after that Canelo Alvarez fight, never. So I'm supposed to believe that he didn't fight Danny Jacobs at the best point in time in his career. That's what I'm supposed to believe. And then he fights Callum Smith, apparently from what I hear, coming off of a poor decision over that of John Ryder, but also a fighter that won the Super 6 Series tournament, a guy that had knocked out multiple names within that weight class. That's the fighter that Canelo Alvarez fought and beat. I'm supposed to believe that Callum Smith was not at the peak of his career when he was young and in his 20s and an undefeated fighter and pretty much a damn near light heavyweight. Then he fights Caleb Plant, who is the undefeated IBF champion of that weight class, and these same guys, isn't it interesting that, once again, they state that with Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant, whenever they're going to fight one of Canelo's contemporaries, it's one of the biggest fights in boxing, and it's an A-grade level win. But as soon as Canelo fights these guys, all of a sudden, they're weak European white boys. Remember, Caleb Plant versus David Benavidez right after Canelo had knocked him out. This was right after Canelo had knocked him out already. There was no discussion about David Benavidez fighting a finished Caleb Plant. There was no discussion about that. When David Benavidez fought Caleb Plant, it was an A-grade level win, and it was one of the biggest fights in boxing. It's a must-watch. But then Canelo fights Caleb Plant, and Caleb Plant, he slows down later on in the second half. So once again, how a hater is that the goalpost always moves when it comes to that's how you know that these LDBC and new media guys that they're haters of Canelo Alvarez because nothing is ever good enough for them. The goalpost is always moving, and that's what a hater does. I have to constantly move the goalpost because if you ever reach that goalpost, overall that I'm putting up for you, and if I don't change it constantly, then I'm going to have to finally give you overall your due credit, and I can't do that.
The temper.
And then, of course, when we talk about other fighters, Billy Joe Saunders, undefeated champion in 2 weight classes. And when he was undefeated when he fought Canelo, fought Caleb Plant when he was undefeated, fought Sergey Kovalev, who probably would have been A- at the time, not the same crusher that he was, but coming off of 2 wins over Eleider Alvarez and Anthony Yard, and then fought Jermell Charlo, of course, after a year layoff, but a guy who also recently unified the light middleweight class. All right. So it is what it is, and some people will say, oh, well, Jermell was too small. Jermell is a dude that could be fighting at middleweight. When you take a look at his weight, all right, clearly he could be fighting at middleweight. And Canelo, once again, is only 5'7" with the 71-inch arm reach. He's not a natural 168-pounder. All right, he's not.
Of these said fans or Canelo, that's the first thing that they reach for.
So once again, certain people will say, oh, well, Canelo fights these guys at their worst. Really? So then explain to me all those fights, once again, that I just brought up. How come every single one of those fights that I just brought up, Canelo pretty much fought them pretty much at their best or when they were undefeated, debatably coming off of a great victory or looking overall still to be at their best? Please answer me that.
It must be jealousy. As if somebody can't just be telling the truth. And I feel...
Well, something else has to be going on here. Because, once again, to state the thing about David Benavidez, I agree with that. All that's well and good. But to state that, Canelo's just been matched up perfectly and he fights these guys at the worst times, well, we know that can't be the case because of the things that I just stated. Once again, people act like Canelo fights these guys, always coming off the worst performance or basically always when, they're starting to look poor. Well, we know that that's not true because Gennady Golovkin, Laura, Danny Jacobs, Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders, all these guys that I just mentioned, some of them maybe not coming off the best performance like that of a Callum Smith, but a lot of these guys were looked at as overall still being in the peak of their career. So we know that that's bullshit. So what else is going on here?
It's unfortunate that we live in such a watered down society where in this watered down society with cancel culture and all kinds of things that are prevalent is people can't understand and take constructive criticism. So
I agree, but Andre Ward, in my view, is putting a little bit extra on it. Once again, when you're starting to get into this narrative of, oh, well, he's been matched up perfectly. Well, Mr. Andre Ward, let's talk about your boy Terrence Bud Crawford once again real quick. Because all the elite fighters that he fought, you could really argue overall that he was matched up perfectly against them. But we don't hear anything about that.
Label it as hate.
Because Andre, once again, he scoffs a little bit at Canelo's resume. You can scoff whatever you want to. But the truth is that Canelo has the best resume out of any fighter within boxing within the past 10 plus years.
Have to establish the rules. Hate,
or at least overall probably within the past several plus years,
is not because you're saying something that the person doesn't want to hear. That's not hate at all. I mean, so all through your years of primary school, elementary school, middle school, high school, every teacher was just out to get you. That if your grades were slipping and you were getting a D in their course and they thought you could do better, they're telling you this because they hate, or they telling you this because they're good at their job and they actually care about their students and your grades are slipping. You have a lot of misspellings. You need to proofread your essay.
Right, Mr. Boxing Ego, but to be quite honest with you, that's a really dense and stupid comparison. Why would you compare boxing, which is a very competitive sport where people, a part of the reason, are always trying to prove that they're the best, so a part of that is going to be trying to tear down a little bit overall what the other person does, or at least overall comparing, better. That's a part of boxing, to prove overall who's better. Why would you compare that to a school environment? a teacher and a student report. That makes no sense.
etc., etc. You would never say to a teacher, "You're hating on me because I'm getting an F in your course." That
Right, but why would you even compare overall to that? That doesn't even make any sense.
doesn't even make sense. But somehow, in the world of online behavior, that's what people do. People say, "Oh, you're just hating." But
I mean, that's once again, there's a difference between a teacher and a student rapport or a coach and a learner rapport than what there is between two fighters that could be looked at as potential contemporaries. Of course, you're going to take a look at that rapport as a little bit different than overall what you would a teacher and a student. So that's just stupid.
the good thing with that retort is this: when people say, "Oh, you're just hating," that usually indicates that they don't have anything to add to the conversation.
Well, I agree if all they can say is that you're hating and they overall can't explain why. But once again, Andre Ward has to be hating at least a little bit here because, once again, to state the things about Canelo that he's been matched up perfectly and that, oh, his resume, take a look at his resume. Yeah, I've taken a look at Canelo's resume. Canelo has a great resume. And once again, when you talk about all the fighters within the past several years that have debatably been within that number one pound for pound spot or right there, Canelo has a better resume than all of them, period. He has a better resume than Crawford. He has a better resume than Spence. He has a better resume than Lomachenko. He has a better resume than Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. He has a better resume than Inoue. He has a better resume than Fury. He has a better resume than Usyk. He has a better resume than Devin Haney. He has a better resume than any of those fighters, period. People can overall, once again, they can, state overall the opposite, but the proof is in the pudding.
So they just surmise it as you're hating on Canelo, right? But Canelo brought this on himself. He's finding every reason not to fight David Benavidez. And as Andre Ward suggested in this brand new interview, at the end of the day, you're going to be held to the highest of standards. I've already told you on my channel that Canelo has a easy, very easy solution to this all. Drop the belts. If he were to drop the belts, then he wouldn't have as many problems. But
I would somewhat agree with that. That is, of course, if Canelo Alvarez truly does not plan to fight that at David Benavidez. But like I said, I wouldn't be shocked at all if they're just trying to build up the fight, but we'll see. I do believe that Canelo believes that David Benavidez is a massive threat. I think that there's no doubt about it. I can tell by the way that he talks about him and, of course, the amount of money that he's asking for him, which I don't mind. But we'll see. Another question also is about Boxing Ego is that how come these same standards are not applied to that of Gervonta Tank Davis? And this is why I also tell people this. The LDBC and new media is clearly a pro-black cult. They throw out a lot of racialist and racist propaganda, and pro-racial agendas. It just is what it is. And some people will be like, oh, that's nonsense. You just can't handle the truth. Okay, well, let me ask you guys something. How come whenever it comes, Boxing Ego and these guys, this is a tactic that they love to use. Whenever it comes to a close fight and it's a non-black fighter that they love to criticize, how come overall whenever they get a close decision, it's a quote-unquote robbery? Remember, and Boxing Ego, will tell you this himself. Lomachenko versus Jermaine Ortiz was a robbery. Gennady Golovkin versus Danny Jacobs was a robbery. Filip Hrgovic versus Zhilei Zhang was a robbery. Tyson Fury versus Francis Ngannou was a robbery. Canelo versus Lara was a robbery. And others, fights like that was a robbery. But then when it comes to Jermell Charlo, versus that of what was his name, Brian Gastano. Oh well, it was a draw. It was close. People overall, they just don't know what they're talking about. But that wasn't a quote unquote robbery. Why is that? Could it be potentially because they're trying to push up Jermell Charlo? Wilder versus Fury 1, which, by the way, was one of the worst robberies that I've personally ever seen. All of a sudden, Boxing Ego states that, oh, that's a close fight, and I don't know why people are saying that Fury won because it was scored as a draw and blah, 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 and their punch stats were only separated by 10 punches. Right, all of a sudden, that's not a robbery. Isn't that interesting? Isn't it also interesting, once again, that every time that there's a fighter that is a non-black fighter that is looked at as debatably the best within 3 separate weight classes, they immediately have to try to tear that guy down, like Inoue, or Tyson Fury or Usyk or Gennady Golovkin or Canelo Alvarez. Isn't that interesting? But the fighters that are not looked at as the best within multiple weight classes that are non-black, They have no problem talking about them like Josh Taylor or that of David Benavidez. I always tell people this. They use non-black fighters as a pawn all the time. The reason why they do that overall, once again, is they'll say, oh well, they're not putting racialist agendas out there because they give credit to this guy and that guy. The reason why they give credit to those guys is because they're not looked at, as the best of their weight classes. But you notice every time that Inoue is being debated as number one, or Fury, or Usyk, or Lomachenko, or Canelo, they have to immediately step in because they can't handle that. They can't have that. And that's basically their main objective. That's why they were so pissed off when Inoue won Fighter of the Year last year, even though he fought within the past 12 months when he got it, 3 champions that had belts at the time. Now, you can debate that not every single one was A grade, of course, but according to the LDBC and new media, Steve Uncle Boy Fulton was a potential top 5 to top 10 pound per pound fighter. And then on top of that, he became undisputed in 2 separate weight classes within a 12-month span, not like a several-year span like how Terrence Bud Crawford did it when it came down to it. So, and then on top of that, he beat Steve Uncle Boy Fulton, and he knocked all of them out. And he was debatably the most dominant fighter of that year. And they had no problem. Remember, Terrence Crawford was majorly disrespected because he got the biggest win of the year in Errol Spence, blah, blah, blah. But when Devin Haney was in the conversation, they had no problem with it. Isn't that interesting? But in a way, all of a sudden, is in the conversation, and it's disrespectful. So once again, a lot of people sit here and tell me, oh, you're wrong. These guys, they're just telling the truth, blah, blah, blah. No, they're not. And don't get me wrong. I'm not stating that, that they don't say certain things that may not be quote unquote truthful or constructive, but a lot of the shit that they say clearly is very racial, very racialized. It is what it is. They have a lot of racial propaganda. All right, it is what it is.
When you have all the belts
and once again, isn't it also interesting that Fury, according to them, he'll never be the best heavyweight ever, even if he retires undefeated, because he gets knocked down too many times, and he doesn't have the resume, blah blah blah. Canelo can never be up there because of his moves, and he doesn't have the resume. But then Terrence Crawford, he really only has at max 4 A-grade wins in his career, and he's already top 5 to top 10 all time already after that Errol Spence Jr. win. Isn't that interesting? So once again, people will they'll tell me, certain times from these channels and say, oh, they're not racially motivated. Absolutely they are. There's so much evidence that points to the fact that they are racially motivated. Absolutely. Even a blind, even Helen Keller can see overall that these guys are racially motivated. Like, give me a break.
Given division in a competitive sport.
And I'm not saying that Andre Ward necessarily is, but once again, do I think that there's a little bit of a deeper motivation other than that's just what he truly believes? Yes, because to go as far to state that, oh, Canelo, he's been perfectly matched, overall, basically asserting that Canelo's resume is a little bit more hype than what it is reality. That to me is something that can't really be proven. Because like I said, I just mentioned all the fights.
Like boxing, then guess what? That comes with responsibility. Whether you like it.
Now, if you want to state once again like that with someone like a Terrence Bud Crawford, that would even be something that I understand a little bit more. Even though I still give him the credit over Sean Porter and Errol Spence because those guys are A-grade wins when he fought them. But to state overall once again that, with Canelo, that, oh, he picks and chooses, well then, Mr. Andre S.O.G. Ward, let's talk about your boy Terrence Bud Crawford here for a minute. Like I said, Sean Porter, already lost 3 times, not a champion when he fought him. Errol Spence, 1.5 layoff, if you want to, bring up that point, in major car accidents, Kell Brook and Amir Khan, I mean, that goes without saying, Yuriorkis Gamboa, not even in the same weight class, coming off of a year layoff. So let's keep the same standards across the table.
Or not. Canelo has a responsibility to the world of boxing, to its fans, and the people who have put him in this position to fight the best, Andre Ward also said in this interview, it's not about fighting the best each time out, because then, your star could burn out really quick. But you're going to have some give me fights. You're going to have some like tune-up style fights. No biggie. But as long as your resume is speaking for itself, and every third fight, every second fight or whatever.
Right, but what about Canelo Alvarez's resume does not really speak for itself? like this is the thing that I'm really not getting. Like, people try to act like Canelo Alvarez for like the past 7 years, like this hasn't fought anybody. And people can try to use this European stiff argument all they want to, but at the end of the day, Billy Joe Saunders was looked at once upon a time as a huge threat to the middleweight division. All right, that's what he was looked at. There were certain people talking about a Billy Joe Saunders versus Golovkin mega fight at one time. There was people talking about a great fight between Andrade and Billy Joe Saunders. Remember when that fight was about to be set up and Dante's Boxing Nation and these guys claimed that that was a super fight? All right, that's what they stated. Their words, not mine. All right, that it was one of the biggest fights in boxing. And then Caleb Plant versus Benavidez, one of the biggest fights in boxing. Then Canelo Alvarez fights them and their European stiffs. Like, that's what I'm supposed to believe.
Is a ranked guy a better fight in a competitive sport like boxing, you should be okay. Canelo Alvarez, what Dre Ward was saying is he's picking and choosing guys at certain convenient moments. He says when he fought Crusher Kovalev, he was
Right, which has been proven false.
no longer the Crusher. He was pretty much washed. He had already lost to Andre Ward.
Right, but and then this also needs to be addressed. There's a difference between a fighter that may not be at the peak of their powers or someone that's a little bit older versus someone that's a washed up fighter. Like another fighter that this always comes in the topic with that I talk about is that of Tyson Fury. And I get certain guys that tell me, oh, well, I don't count the Vladimir Klitschko win because Klitschko was washed. He was 39 years old. So you're going to tell me that Klitschko was washed up, even though overall he had the belts, pretty much every single belt in that weight class and had not been defeated in 11 years. And then a year and a half later against AJ Anthony Joshua, he literally gave him the fight of his life and damn near stopped AJ Anthony Joshua. I'm supposed to believe that Vladimir Klitschko was completely washed up when Fury beat him. I'm sorry. I'm just not buying it. Like I said, you have to, you have to really decipher the difference between a fighter that's completely washed up and fighters that either might just be a little bit older or may not be at the peak of their powers. All right. So once again, let's we have to overall decipher that. Kell Brook and Amir Khan when they fought, Terrence Crawford, those are washed up fighters. Sergio Martinez when he fought Miguel Cotto, that was a washed up fighter. Canelo when he fought Carlos Baldomir and that of Sugar Shane Mosley, those are washed up fighters. Those are done fighters. Okay, those are washed up fighters. Not Vladimir Klitschko when he fought Fury and he still looked at as the best heavyweight in the world and one of the top 3 to top 5 pound for pound fighters on the planet. Not Sergey the Crusher Kovalev when he was coming off of 2 great light heavyweight wins, overall and still had the WBO belt. So it's like, please.
He got stopped.
And not Gennady Golovkin when he's 36 years old, still undefeated and still tearing through guys. Like, come on.
By leader Alvarez, and then Canelo wants all this credit for that. Plus, Kovalev was coming off a very dangerous and hard fight versus Anthony Yard, and he didn't really have sufficient time to regroup and recover. He didn't have that rest and recovery. He's fighting Canelo straight after that, pretty much. So
Sergey Kovalev had 1 round against Anthony Yard where he was in trouble, and then other than that, the rest of the fight was a complete ass whooping. Like, people try to act like that was some major war. It was a complete ass whooping from pillar to post other than 1 round, where Sergey Kovalev, of course, was in a bit of trouble, and, the fight could have potentially even been stopped in certain points, but he ended up lasting overall within the next rounds and stopping him. So once again, people try to tell you that it was like this Eric Morales, Marco Antonio Barrera war. It wasn't. It was an ass whooping besides that of 1 round.
That's not good for a fighter to be over 30, have recent stoppage losses, and
from about a year to a year and a half ago before Canelo Alvarez fought him. So, I'm sorry, but that point in my view is pretty much null and void.
You're getting out of one training camp immediately.
Now, once again, if you want to state that he was not the same Crusher that had fought Andre Ward, that's something that's completely understandable. But to say that Sergey just wasn't, a decent champion, no, I'm sorry, I can't agree with that.
Going into another one to face Canelo or whoever else, an elite fighter. It just doesn't make sense, especially when Anthony Yard nearly stopped him. If you go watch that fight, Buddy McGirt said, if you give me another round like that, I'm throwing in the towel. So it doesn't get any more off.
Right, but once again, that's the only round where it was where it was really even particularly close. Like a lot of these guys, once again, and this is why I have to address this, because a lot of the times it's much more narrative than what it is reality. These guys will try to tell you like that fight was like this super big war. It wasn't. Sergey Kovalev was whooping that boy's ass. Like he was whooping his ass, when it came down to it. There was only 1 round where Sergey Kovalev was really in super huge trouble. And then, 1 or 2 rounds after that, he stopped him.
And that. Everything Andre Ward said was correct. Canelo.
No, it wasn't all correct. There was some stuff that he said that was correct. But once again, everything, no. Because the state that Canelo just fights these guys at the right time when they're cooked. No, I'm sorry.
Has the onus as a boxer. Do you want to be a boxer? Or do you want to be a golfer? You're holding up all the titles in the given division. People want to see you fight the best. And David Benavidez is barking up that tree. And you can't stop it. You're not going to make these problems go away until you face him. So I think Canelo should fight David Benavidez. More and more people, from Floyd Mayweather, who at times he said he wanted to see the fight, Winky Wright, Andre Ward, Oscar De La Hoya, a bunch of people, they're saying the same thing. And the Canelo fans really can't defend it at this point, so they'll just say you're hating. Let me know what you guys think.
But anyways, that's pretty much about it for this video. But in my view, is it hating, once again, to state that Canelo should fight David Benavidez? No. Because of course that would be a guy that would be looked at as a mandatory and a guy within his weight class. Although, once again, I will state that it is a little bit odd that Benavidez, he says that he still wants that fight, and then he moved up to light heavyweight. And then after that, apparently he's going to move to cruiserweight. I do find that a bit odd. But, maybe there's a plan overall that maybe I'm just not seeing. I don't know. We'll see. But anyways, that's that's pretty much about it for today. And we'll see how much more use David Benavidez is really going to have with these guys. Once again, because they don't believe that Benavidez is ever going to be a threat to the #1 pound-for-pound spot. And we'll see, once again, how much use he has, with that light heavyweight contending spot. Let's see overall what ends up happening there. Because Benavidez might just put himself in a very dangerous position, if he doesn't fight the winner of Bivol versus Better Beef. So we'll see. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see where this goes. But like I said, if we're going to keep these standards, and let's keep the same standards across the board, about, oh, well, this fighter already had lost, I can't really count that. So, okay. Well, then when it comes to Oscar De La Hoya's career, let's not give him that much credit over that of Fernando Vargas, because Fernando Vargas already been knocked out before, if we're going to use those standards. If we're going to use the standards once again for Canelo, that, oh, well, Sergey had already lost multiple times by knockout. Miguel Cotto had already been knocked out brutally in two times. Now, of course, it probably wasn't as close as what Kovalev was, when he got stopped, right when he was about to fight Canelo Alvarez. That's fair. But once again, let's use these same standards across the board. Let's just not use them for certain fighters that we like to nitpick apart their resume and their career because we don't like them, So it is what it is. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. And like I said, we must keep the same energy and the same standards across the board if you're a logical thinker. That's pretty much about it. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later.